Okay, so for the offering today, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, and we're talking about the advantage of contributing. Now, Paul starts out there in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 7, and he says, "Consider this, what soldier at any time serves at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat any of the fruit of it? Or who tends a flock and does not partake of the milk of the flock?" So he's taking a bunch of examples, everyday examples there, and out of military and economy, and he's saying soldiers do not pay to be soldiers. They are employed to be soldiers. Or if you've got a vineyard, then you expect that you're going to be partaking of the vineyard. You're going to eat some of the fruit of it. If you have a flock, then you eat of the flock. It's something that we all know. And then he goes on and he says, "Do I say this only on human authority or as a man reasons? Does not the law endorse the same principle?" Now, of course, Paul was in the unique situation of not only having been raised and trained as a Pharisee, but then he's also encountered the Lord, and so he's spirit-filled. And so he's saying that what we see over here, the idea that a soldier will be paid for his service, the idea that if you are planting a vineyard, then you may partake of the fruit, the idea that if you tend to a flock, then you partake of the milk of the flock. This is not only a human reasoning. He says, "Does the law not endorse the same principle? For in the law of Moses, it's also written that you shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the corn." Is it only for oxen that God cares? And so even in the law, there was the principle that when an ox is treading out the corn, then you don't muzzle the ox, so the ox can eat of the corn that it's treading. And so the idea there is that while you're doing the work, you can enjoy fruits of the work that is going on. So then Paul writes, or does he speak certainly and entirely for our sakes? He says, "Assuredly it's written for our sakes, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher ought to thresh in expectation." What expectation? Well, the plowman needs to plow in the hope of partaking in the harvest, and the thresher needs to thresh in expectation of partaking in the harvest. So this is something that is provided for in the law. It's in the law, but it's also in the Bible, in the New Testament, and that's why Paul is addressing it over here. So then he goes on and he says, "If we have sown the seed of spiritual good among you, is it too much if we reap from your material benefits?" So it's a biblical thing to contribute to the material benefits of whoever is sowing the seed of spiritual good among you. That's the idea here. If somebody is investing in your spiritual well-being, then it is good and proper for you to contribute to their material benefits. And he says, if others have this rightful claim upon you, so it was back in the day, it was seen as a rightful claim. It was a natural progression of things. It was a common day, everyday occurrence that he says, others have the rightful claim. Do we not have still a still better and a greater claim? Because, of course, he was the one who planted the congregation in the first place. And then he says this, "However, we have never exercised this right, but we endure everything rather than put a hindrance in the way of the spread of the good news of the gospel." So when Paul, at the time of Paul's writing of this first letter to the Corinthians, his mindset is that of wanting to not put a hindrance in the spread of the good news. And his decision is to not exercise the right that the congregation will contribute to his ministry. Now, we'll see how that changes when we go to the second letter of Corinthians. But at this point in time, he's saying, I'm not going to make use of this right because I don't want to put a hindrance on the spread of the good news. And it sounds very noble, but he's come to different insights, and we'll see how. So, but before that, in verse 13, he says, "Do you not know that those men who are employed in the services of the temple get their food from the temple? And those who tend the altar share with the altar in the offerings brought." That, of course, was the way with the Levites. Is when the Israelites came and brought their burnt offerings, then some of the meat went to the Levites. So as they were ministering in the temple, they partook of this. And on the same principle, the Lord directed that those who publish the good news, so preach the gospel, should live and get their maintenance by the gospel. So it is a principle. It could offend you or it could not offend you, but ultimately it is a principle that that those who publish the good news should live and get their maintenance by the gospel. And so it's a touchy subject because finance is something that we all feel very close to the heart, and budgets are stretched, especially in this time. But the thing is, there is a blessing. There is a blessing in contributing to those who and to sowing into the lives and into the ministries of those who are sowing the seed of spiritual good among you. Listen to what Paul writes when he comes to 2 Corinthians. So now it's the second letter, 2 Corinthians 12:13, and he's actually discussing different things at this point in time. The main topic in that chapter is not about money. It's not about contributing, but it's like he interrupts his trail of thought. He's talking about this topic, and then he's saying, in what respect were you put to a disadvantage in comparison with the rest of the churches? So he's actually saying to the Corinthians, I've come and I've placed every opportunity before you to excel. And then as he's saying that, he's saying, okay, except maybe this one thing, unless it was for the fact that I myself did not burden you with my financial support. So he's saying, it's like he's going through his mind saying, there's absolutely nothing that there was no disadvantage in comparison with the other churches, except, wait a minute, maybe there's one thing. And that is that I didn't burden you with my financial support. And then he says, pardon me for doing you this injustice. So Paul comes to other insights. Going from, I don't want to be putting a hindrance on you in the spreading of the gospel, to actually understanding that he placed this church in Corinth at a disadvantage because he didn't burden them. Again, you could be offended by it or not, but ultimately, this is, it's in the Bible that there is an advantage to contributing to a ministry. If you sow, there's the principle of what you sow, you will reap that and only that. And we'll look at it in future, but there you become a partaker of the grace on the ministry as you contribute to the ministry. And like I say, I'm not going to cover that today. We'll talk about that maybe next week. But ultimately, if Paul can come to different insights, then perhaps we should come to different insights as well. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to give and bless you as you do so. And may the advantage of this contribution be a big one that you can experience the fruit of. Because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher ought to thresh in hope, and you ought to sow in hope that you're going to be partaking of this harvest that is on the way. Amen.